She trusted the one man who never spoke a word, until the silence broke her heart. Out on that dusty ranch, Cassie McGraw thought she'd found freedom, milking cows under the wide-open sky, far from the lies she'd run from. But the quiet cowboy who patched her boots and played her sorrow on a harmonica was never just a farmhand. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, voice shaking. Betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers in the small hours when you've given everything. And when the truth finally cracked through his silence, it shattered her trust in ways no storm ever could. She begged him for a single word, just one reason to stay. "Please, don't go," he finally said. But it was too late. Sometimes the loudest lies are told by the quietest hearts. Cassie McGraw wasn't meant for dirt under her nails and the sting of a summer sun on her bare neck. At least that's what the town gossips always said. They'd whisper over picket fences and cocktail glasses that Marshall McGraw's only daughter was spun from silk and marble. Not sweat and grit, but Cassie herself would have told you a different story. The day she slammed the polished front door of her father's mansion for the last time, her shoes echoing on imported stone, she swore she'd trade every diamond bracelet for a bruise she'd earned herself. It wasn't courage that pushed her onto that bus with a single canvas bag and a folded letter from the employment agency. It was the fear of living the rest of her life as a pawn on her father's chessboard, bartered off to some man with soft hands and a sharp smile, in exchange for a bigger contract or a cleaner scandal. The bus wheezed like an old dog as it dropped her at the crossroads. Just a dirt road slicing through endless prairie, barbed wire fencing in the horizon. No sign, no town, just heat rippling off the earth like an omen. At Doyle Ranch, the first voice she heard was a weathered chuckle. Harlan Doyle, the man whose name was still carved into the barn door after 50 years of cattle drives and hard winters, sized her up with a smirk and a grandfather's patience. He asked her if she was the one from the city, the girl not afraid of cows. She squared her shoulders, hitched her bag higher, and fired back, "I'm not afraid of much." Harlan just shook his head and waved her inside the corral, the boards rough and warm under her fingertips. But it wasn't Harlan who'd test her mettle. It was Wyatt Holloway, a name she didn't know yet, just a tall shadow leaning against a fence post when the dusk painted him bronze and gold. He wore his silence like a second skin, sleeves rolled, boots caked in dust, eyes fixed on the horizon like he could outstare the sun. When Harlan introduced him, he didn't speak, just tipped his hat in a nod so small it might have been a trick of the wind. Cassie bristled at first. She thought silence was just another weapon rich men used to make her feel small, but Wyatt's quiet wasn't an edge. It was a shield, built brick by some hurt she couldn't yet see. Her first days milking cows were worse than she imagined. The city had left her soft in all the wrong places. Her palms blistered, her back ached in places she didn't know she owned, and the smell of livestock clung to her skin no matter how long she scrubbed at the outdoor spigot. The cows shifted and snorted, tails flicking her in the face when her patience frayed. She'd curse under her breath, slam down a pail, and sometimes, when no one was watching, she'd sink to the barn floor and let a few tears fall where the dirt would catch them. But every morning, something changed. The stall was cleaner than she'd left it. The stubborn wrench she fought with was freshly oiled. Her cracked boots, once split at the sole, were stitched so neatly it could have been done by a cobbler in town. And her water flask, dented, battered, was always full, cold to the touch, left waiting where she tied her laces. Wyatt never said a word about these kindnesses. He never stood close enough for her to ask, but sometimes she'd catch him glancing her way, his eyes soft where the rest of him was stone. Then came the heifer. It was the hottest afternoon yet, the sky low and heavy like it might crack open just to watch her flinch. She'd done everything right, the gentle cooing, the slow steps. But when a crow cawed from the rafters, the young cow spooked. A horn grazed her ribs, and she hit the dirt so hard the world went white around the edges. She barely felt the arms scooping her up, strong and rough, careful and certain. In the half-light of the supply shed, she saw Wyatt's face for the first time without the barn door or his hat brim to hide him. He pressed a rag to her side, the hush of the rain outside almost louder than the rush of blood in her ears. "Say something," she demanded through gritted teeth. blinking away the tears that made her feel like a child again. He didn't. He just looked at her, jaw clenched, eyes full of words he'd buried so deep they'd forgotten the way out. She hated him for it. Then, that he could be so close and still so far. When her father came, it wasn't with a letter or a plea. It was with a black car idling like a threat at the ranch gate. Marshal McGraw wore his disapproval like his suit coat, tailored to perfection. He told her she'd made enough of a fool of herself. There was a man waiting back home, a deal to be signed, a life to slip back into. Cassie didn't scream. She just grabbed Wyatt's wrist, the same wrist that never reached for hers, and said the thing that broke them both. Maybe I will marry him. At least he doesn't lie. The truth snapped like a fence post in a storm. Wyatt Holloway wasn't just a ranch hand. He was the Holloway heir, the silent owner of acres she'd worked with her own bleeding palms. He could have bought her father's company 10 times over, but he'd chosen dirt and sweat over oil and marble. He'd chosen silence because it was safer than being seen for his wealth. She ran. He stayed. And somewhere between the barn door creaking shut and the lonely whine of a harmonica under the old oak tree, they both learned that betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's the quiet that hurts the worst. Sometimes it takes a stitched handkerchief, a note tucked into a pocket, and the stubborn mercy of wide prairie skies to lead two people home again. Cassie McGraw and Wyatt Holloway weren't meant to be loud. They were meant to endure. And on that dusty ranch, they learned that sometimes the quietest promises are the ones that last. In the dusty outskirts of New Mexico, there's still an old-timer's tale they'll whisper around campfires on restless nights. Folks remember a man named Gabriel Ruiz, a ranch hand who worked the same stretch of desert for 40 years. They called him Dusty Gabe because his boots were never clean, no matter if the rains came or not. His coat was patched so many times it looked like a quilt. He slept in a rickety shack behind the cattle pens, the roof patched with tin sheets that clattered in the wind like coins shaken in a beggar's cup. To the ranchers and farm hands who knew him, Gabe was nothing special. He'd milk cows at dawn, mend fences that the dry winds snapped like toothpicks, and sip black coffee alone by a dying fire at night. He rarely spoke more than a grunt when asked about his family or where he'd come from. Some said he'd lost it all to bad debts. Others thought he was just too simple to want more. When he died one bitter January morning, they almost buried him with his boots still on. But the lawyer who drove up in a big city Cadillac changed everything. He had papers in hand. Deeds, banknotes, maps. Turns out old Gabe had been buying up bits of land for decades, one dry acre at a time. He'd come to own 50 miles of prime grazing land, more than the ranch owners who'd written him off as a poor drifter. People were floored. The same men who'd laughed at his frayed collar realized they'd been working on his land the whole time. He'd never flaunted it, never used his ownership as a crown. He chose to die in a shack he could have replaced 100 times over. Because for him, wealth didn't buy trust. His silence did. Wyatt Holloway is that echo in another man's boots. To Cassie McGraw, he was just a quiet ranch hand who stitched her torn soles when she wasn't looking. But the truth under all that dust? He was Gabe's ghost, a man who owned everything yet asked for nothing. It's a lesson you see over and over in the West. You don't know what a man carries until he's gone. Some kingdoms hide behind marble gates. Others hide behind a pair of cracked boots and a harmonica under the stars. Cassie McGraw isn't alone. Not really. I've known a woman like her. Maybe you have too. She grew up in a penthouse high above the city streets, where the sound of taxis and sirens lulled her to sleep like a mechanical lullaby. She was a corporate lawyer, the kind who could hold a room with a single raised eyebrow. Contracts, mergers, deals over dimly lit steak dinners. She did it all. She could recite employment clauses in her sleep, could shred a rival's testimony with just the right question asked in the calmest tone. But there was a cost. You could see it in her wrists, always wrapped in pearls that felt more like chains than jewelry. You could see it in her eyes, hollow the way the city can hollow you, when all you do is barter pieces of your soul for paychecks you never have time to spend. One day she walked away, just like that. She took her savings and bought 10 acres of weedy farmland 3 hours out, where the earth was so dry it cracked like old paint. She didn't know the first thing about soil pH or when to plant heirloom tomatoes. But she knew this. She needed dirt under her fingernails, needed to wake up to roosters instead of email alerts, needed to feel her own heart again, even if it meant working until her palms bled. I visited her once. She was on her knees in the garden, dirt on her cheek, laughing when her irrigation line burst and drenched her from head to toe. "Best day I've had in years," she said. Bruised knees, a leaky roof. But she said she'd never felt more honest. Cassie's story is the same story in a prairie sun. That freedom doesn't look like crystal chandeliers and nameplates. It looks like a blister that heals, like a cup of water left waiting by someone who doesn't need to be thanked. Cassie's bruised hands mirror the truth a lot of us forget. Comfort is nice, but honest work, no matter how hard, makes you feel more alive than any gold-plated elevator ever could. The West has always loved its quiet men. Look at the legends. The Lone Ranger whose shadow stretches longer than his words ever will. The war veteran who came home with more ghosts than stories, fixing fences at dawn because it's easier than sleeping. The drifter with the battered hat pulled low, who tips his brim instead of saying thank you. Wyatt Holloway is the last living echo of that archetype, the man who lets his deeds speak where his tongue stays still. When you read old dime novels, they paint these men like heroes with silver spurs and shiny six-shooters. But the truth is, they're men who learned early that a promise means more when it's shown, not shouted. People today forget this, living in a world so loud you can't hear your own breath half the time. We crave grand gestures, billboards, love letters, public vows shouted on rooftops. But a promise kept in silence, a fence mended before it breaks, a bucket of clean water where you'll find it at dawn? That's the Old West Code. That's Wyatt, the promise you don't even have to ask for. Maybe that's why Cassie fell so hard for him before she even knew his name. Because sometimes you don't need a serenade under the window. You just need a man who holds the gate open without asking why you keep trying to run through it. There's a saying, when you love someone, it shows up in the smallest ways. Anyone can buy you roses, but the one who mends your broken umbrella when a storm's brewing, that's the one who stays. Cassie didn't see love in Wyatt's eyes. At first, she thought he barely saw her at all. But she saw it in the small things. The boots she tossed aside after the stitching split. She found them mended with neat, tight loops. The old brush she left in the barn after scrubbing the stalls, cleaned and set out for her before dawn. The flask filled with water so cold it made her teeth ache in the heat of summer. He never once asked for thanks, never waited for her to notice, and maybe that's what stung the most when she found out who he really was. He could have bought her 10 new pairs of boots, paved the road she walked on, but instead he chose to fix what she already had. Quiet proof that love, real love, shows up when you're not looking. Think back. Who in your life stayed silent but steady when your world rattled loose? The friend who sat outside the courtroom while you fell apart inside? The neighbor who knocked with soup when you swore you didn't need help? That's what Wyatt's silence was. Not an absence, but 1,000 small promises kept. Not every story in this prairie is warm. Some truths cut like barbed wire. Cassie's father, Marshall McGraw, built his life on the trade of people's futures like cattle at an auction yard. He saw his daughter not as a wild-hearted woman, but as a bargaining chip, a ribbon to tie around a contract that needed signing. Don't think it's just an old rancher's trick. This happens in glass towers and suburban homes every day. Families who smile in photos while whispering threats behind closed doors. Parents who say, "We gave you everything, so you'll hand your life back when they ask." Marriages arranged not for love, but for land, status, the right last name printed on the guest list. Cassie said no. She paid the price. She slept on a thin bunkhouse mattress instead of silk sheets. She smelled like cows and sweat instead of perfume and roses. But freedom never smells sweet at first. Sometimes it reeks of mud and manure and salt from your own tears. But it's yours. And once you've breathed that air, once you've chosen blistered palms over gilded cages, you can never go back. The real tragedy? There are Cassies everywhere. Some stay, some never get on the bus. Some run but circle back, thinking they're too weak to stand the storm. But the truth is this: every runaway daughter, every runaway son carries the seed of something wilder than any ranch. The seed of a life that can't be bought or bartered. Why do people fear being really known? Maybe because once someone knows your truth, the raw, unpolished, unfiltered truth, they hold a piece of you that can't be taken back. It's a double-edged gift. For some, it's freedom. For others, it's a loaded gun waiting to be turned on you when you're at your weakest. Wyatt Holloway understood that better than most. He learned it the hard way. Speak your worth, show people the deed to your name, and they stop seeing the man behind the dirt street collar. They don't care about the hands that fix fences or the back that breaks in the heat. They see dollar signs, profit margins, a meal ticket. Maybe they smile sweet, maybe they pour you another glass of whiskey. But the second your worth becomes a number, your name becomes a ledger, not a memory. So Wyatt chose silence, and in that hush he found a space where someone, just maybe, could see him as more than the sum of his inheritance. Why do we crave real over grand promises? Because real doesn't vanish when the storms come. Cassie McGraw didn't want diamonds glittering on her wrist if they came with a leash attached. She didn't want a man who'd say, "I'll love you forever," from behind a boardroom door he'd lock when she spoke too loudly. She wanted Wyatt, or rather she wanted the quiet comfort of knowing that when she fell, someone would be there to lift her up. No audience needed. There's a reason why the old cowhands say the land tests you before it feeds you. It doesn't matter how polished your boots are when you step into mud up to your knees. The ranch is a living metaphor for love. The fences break no matter how well you mend them. The wind howls through the cracks in the roof when you're bone-tired and just want rest. The cattle wander off when you think you finally earned a breather, and every single day you get up and fix what's broken. Not because you love the work, but because you love what it means to keep tending it. That's trust. That's love. Not perfect, but chosen again and again, even when it hurts your back and your pride. People like Marshall McGraw never understood that. To them, trust is transactional. A paper you sign, a name you leverage, a daughter you barter. But for people like Cassie, the real gold is in a promise that can't be drafted by a lawyer. It's the steady hand that fixes your boots while you sleep. It's the water flask left on the fence post, full and cold for when your throat runs dry. It's the quiet presence beside you when the storm knocks the roof loose. The real promise doesn't need to be spoken. It just needs to be kept. Silence is a strange thing. It can wound, it can heal. Cassie learned that. At first, Wyatt's hush felt like a wall she could never climb. Every question she hurled at him fell at his boots like stones that never hit the mark. But over time, that same silence turned into a shelter. She began to see the spaces between words as a place where truth could breathe. Because some truths grow best in the hush between two heartbeats. That split second when your eyes lock with someone else's, and you know they see the worst of you, and they don't look away. Have you ever felt more seen in a moment of silence than in 1,000 empty words? Maybe you were sitting on a hospital floor next to someone who didn't ask you to explain your tears. They just held your hand. Maybe you sat across a fire from a friend who said nothing but added another log to keep you warm. Maybe you lay next to someone who didn't whisper sweet nothings, but pulled the blanket tighter when you shivered. We live in a world obsessed with noise, with declarations, confessions, hashtags, and promises screamed from rooftops. But the old cowboys knew better. The wind on the prairie carries secrets that words would only cheapen. Wyatt Holloway wasn't mute because he lacked things to say. He just knew words could be currency or chains. He wanted his actions to do the speaking for him, so when Cassie found the stitched boots, the folded blanket, the patched fence line, she'd know, truly know, that his love wasn't a thing that could be bartered. Maybe that's what broke her heart when the truth came out. Not that he was rich, but that he thought he had to hide it from her to be loved for who he really was. He knew what the world did with open truths. He'd rather stay hidden in his own land than let greed twist his worth into a price tag. So many of us carry pieces of Wyatt and Cassie inside us. We crave the grand gestures because they're easy to photograph, easy to post. But what we really want, deep down, is to be held steady when the barn roof leaks, when the cattle break through the fence line, when the world outside tells us we're too much, too bruised, too stubborn to be worth keeping. The ranch is a place of constant repair. So is love. The storms will keep coming. The fences will keep breaking. The wind will howl at your windows until you patch the cracks again. And when you're bone tired, you'll want someone beside you who doesn't need to say, "I love you" every 5 minutes. Because you'll see it in the fresh water jug waiting by the door, the stitched seam on your coat, the quiet voice that says, "Stay" when you're ready to run. In the end, the hush between Cassie McGraw and Wyatt Holloway was never empty. It was full of small truths, stitched together like a pair of mended boots. Imperfect, worn, but stronger than any lie the world could spin. And maybe that's the lesson they leave for us, that the greatest love stories aren't written in diamonds or engraved on the gates of marble mansions. They're whispered in barns at midnight, stitched into boots by candlelight, and folded into a quiet promise that says, "You matter, you're safe, I choose you," again and again and again. In this dusty corner of the West, Cassie McGraw and Wyatt Holloway remind us of something the world, especially our modern, noisy world, too often forgets. Truth lives in the small things we do when no one is watching. Wealth may buy fences and barns, but it can't buy trust. Money means nothing if it comes without honesty. And sometimes the strongest "I love you" isn't shouted in a speech or stamped in gold. It's whispered in the hush of a barn at dawn, stitched into a boot you thought nobody noticed, or left waiting in a flask of cold water for the day your throat runs dry. Think about that for a moment. When was the last time you truly felt seen? Not because someone gave you flowers or fancy gifts, but because they showed up for you, quiet and steady. Some of you watching might remember a spouse who sat by your hospital bed without saying a word but never left, or a friend who patched your roof when the rain came through, not for praise, but because that's what neighbors do. This old ranch story still matters because its lesson fits our world today. We live surrounded by grand promises, social media confessions, viral proposals, shiny "look at me" moments. But how many of those last when life gets hard? Cassie chose the hard road when she left her father's marble floor for a dusty bunkhouse and a man who barely spoke. She found out that love you earn, day by day, is worth more than any love you're bought for. Wyatt learned, too, that hiding your worth to protect yourself comes at a cost. Silence can be a shield, but it can also become a prison if you never let anyone hear your truth. So maybe their story leaves us all with a question. Where do you hold back? Where do you stay quiet, not to protect love, but to keep from being used? And what would happen if you took the risk to be known, truly known, for all that you are, even the parts you're sure the world might use against you? It's a lesson that lives far beyond ranch gates. It's in every family, every friendship, every marriage built on small, honest acts instead of loud declarations. The real work is in the mending. Like fences that break, trust needs tending too. It's in the daily choice to stay when storms come, to fix what's cracked, to stand beside the ones you choose. Not just when it's easy, but when it would be simpler to walk away. And maybe that's why this dusty Western tale will keep folks talking. Some will say Wyatt was wrong to hide who he was. Others will say Cassie should have seen through the silence sooner. Some will argue that honesty must be blunt. Others will say it's the quiet acts that matter most. We'd love to hear what you think, so tell us in the comments. When has someone's quiet loyalty meant more than words? Have you ever chosen the harder, more honest path, even when it hurt? Thank you for riding along with us through this story. If it touched you, if it made you remember a moment when silence held more love than 1,000 "I love yous," share this with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget, subscribe to our channel for more timeless Western stories that speak to the quiet corners of the heart. Like this video if you believe that real love isn't bought, it's mended day after dusty day. And until our next story, partner, keep tending your fences and your people. Because the truth is, the strongest promises are the ones you keep when no one else is looking.